here's another problem that's not as dramatic in New Hampshire, but is a terrible problem around the country: the suppression of the vote. So, America is unique among mature democracies in handing over the process of registering and enabling people to vote to essentially partisan machines. Now, that doesn't mean everywhere they behave in a partisan manner. Indeed, I think many places, Iowa and New Hampshire in particular, the operations are very respectful of the principles of neutrality. But in some places, they don't tend to function like that. And so you see the vote suppressed in really outrageous ways. So in Georgia, which was the most extreme example, I think, in 2018, you saw the Secretary of State, who, oh, by the way, was running for governor himself, who changed the system for voting booths all across the state to make it harder for Democrats, who also happen to be black, to vote than for Republicans. And I just wonder what you think we can do as a nation to deliver on what should be an obvious first principle of a democracy, that we all have an equal freedom to vote, and that ought to be guaranteed regardless of your party or regardless of the color of your skin.
Yeah, so one thing I'm for is making Election Day a national holiday. I mean, that would free up people's ability to vote, at least on the day of, and make it so that people don't have to choose between a shift of work or their paycheck or a day's wages necessarily and showing up at the ballot box. Now, you're right that a lot of this does rest in the hands of individual states and secretaries of states. So I would love to try and do things that you can do on a national level. So some of the things I'm for, this actually gets mixed reviews. I'd love to hear what you think. But I'm for lowering the voting age to 16. Because if you can get someone to vote younger, then it actually ends up establishing a lifelong pattern of voting very, very quickly and early. And it would also transform our high schools into hotbeds of actual democracy. Instead of having hypothetical votes, you could be like, look, if you're a junior or senior in high school, you're actually going to be able to vote. Get them in the habit early, and it would also help represent the interests of young people in our democracy because they're going to be on this planet longer. So it's like it makes sense to me that they'd have a say in what we do. So there are things that we can do on a federal level that help just enhance the accessibility of voting. If there's a way we can help undo some of these voter suppression efforts that are going on in Georgia, then I'd be thrilled to do so. But I get the sense that at least in some cases, they are in the hands of the individual state parties.
And automatic vote registration?
Yes, automatic voting registration, I'd be all for that. We should make it as easy to vote as possible. Our turnout rates are quite low in the scheme of things internationally. And you're right that part of that is deliberate. Part of that is that people just want to make it a little bit harder for certain types of people to vote, which means, in my opinion, then that they must know that something is going on. Like if you're practicing democracy effectively, you should not fear the voters.
Yeah, so then what about an incentive solution here? So imagine the federal government said, we send money to every state, but we'll discount it by the proportion of people who don't vote, or who aren't registered to vote. So if only 80% of the eligible voters were registered to vote in your state, we'll cut the amount we're going to give your state by 20%, or take 20% off.
Yeah, I love incentives. It's like a race to the top for registering voters. I love putting resources to work in that way.
Okay. All right, so here's an issue that we might find a little bit of disagreement about, or two.